The night she almost collapsed wasn't because of exhaustion, it was because of the letter. But that letter hadn't come yet. Tonight, she wiped the counter for the 100th time, pretending not to hear her stomach growl, pretending the silence didn't hurt. Outside, the wind howled through the empty parking lot, and the neon open sign flickered like a heartbeat refusing to stop. Her son was home alone again, waiting for a mother who promised she'd be back before sunrise. She glanced at the clock. 3:07 a.m. and whispered, "Just 2 more hours." Somewhere deep inside, she wondered if anyone even noticed she existed anymore. The smell of burnt coffee lingered, the floor sticky from spilled syrup, and her smile, as always, was steady, until the bell above the door chimed, and a stranger stepped in. The man didn't say much that first night. He sat in the corner booth, ordered coffee black, and stared at the window as if he were watching something only he could see. She poured his cup, their fingers brushing briefly, and something in that touch felt different. Not romantic, not familiar, but heavy, like 2 ghosts colliding in the same dream. When she turned away, she noticed he hadn't looked at her once, only at the reflection in the window, and somehow she knew he wasn't really there for the coffee. Hours passed. She wiped tables, refilled salt shakers, and hummed songs she barely remembered. Every few minutes, she glanced at the stranger, still staring at nothing. When he finally spoke, his voice cracked like it hadn't been used in years. "You work every night?" She nodded. He smiled faintly, then slid a folded napkin across the counter. "You remind me of someone I used to know." Before she could respond, he left a $20 bill under his mug and walked out into the storm. When she turned the napkin over, her heart skipped. Written in uneven handwriting were just 6 words. "You don't have to do this." She stood frozen, the storm outside raging harder, her reflection trembling in the glass. Maybe it was a joke, maybe pity, or maybe someone had finally seen her. Not the waitress, not the tired mother, but her. She looked outside, but he was gone, vanished into the rain like a ghost with unfinished business. At dawn, she trudged home, the letter folded inside her pocket, her shoes soaked through. She opened the door to find Liam, 10, asleep on the couch, clutching his drawing. She knelt beside him, brushing hair from his face. For the first time in years, tears came without warning, quiet, heavy, unstoppable. She whispered to herself, who would care enough to write that? The question followed her into the sunrise, the world outside just beginning to glow. The sun had barely risen when she unfolded the napkin again, her trembling fingers tracing each letter as if they might change under her touch. The diner was quiet now, the world outside half awake. She couldn't shake the feeling that the words weren't just kindness, they were meant for her. She stared at them until they blurred, her chest tightening with a fear she couldn't name. Then she noticed something she'd missed before. Beneath the handwriting, faint pencil marks like someone had pressed too hard while writing another note on top of it. She held the napkin to the light, and there, barely visible, was an address. Her mind raced all morning. She clocked out of her shift and walked home through the drizzle, her shoes slapping puddles, the napkin clutched in her hand. The address led to a part of town she hadn't visited in years. Quiet streets lined with broken fences and faded mailboxes. Every step made her wonder if she was doing something foolish, if chasing this mystery would hurt more than help. But curiosity and something else, a whisper of hope, pushed her forward. When she reached the old street, her heart froze. The address belonged to a house that once mattered to her family. It was the same house her husband grew up in. She hesitated at the gate, her breath fogging in the cold air. The house looked abandoned, windows fogged, curtains drawn. She reached out to knock, but before her hand touched the door, it creaked open slightly, as if waiting for her. Inside, the air smelled of dust and faint coffee. On the small wooden table just beyond the doorway, a white envelope sat neatly beneath a chipped mug. Her name was written on it, in the same uneven handwriting from the napkin. She stepped inside, her pulse quickening, each creak of the floorboards echoing louder than her heartbeat. The letter was short, just a few lines written in ink that had bled slightly with age. I owe you more than an apology. I owe you the truth. I've watched you carry pain that should have been mine. I never meant for it to happen, but I can't leave this world without making it right. She read it 3 times, her vision blurring. Who was he? How did he know her pain? The silence in the house pressed against her chest until she couldn't breathe. Then she noticed something else under the letter, a small photograph. It was of her, years ago, holding her son as a baby, taken from across the street. By the time she reached home, her hands wouldn't stop shaking. She locked the door and leaned against it, sliding down until she sat on the floor. The letter lay open beside her, its words looping endlessly in her head. I never meant for it to happen. The phrase clung to her chest like a weight. Liam, 10, peeked out from his bedroom, sleepy-eyed, asking if she was okay. She smiled weakly, hiding the letter behind her back. I'm fine, she whispered, though her voice cracked, but deep down she knew. Someone out there carried the missing piece of her story, and they were finally ready to bring it back. The stranger came back the next night, same booth, same silence. Elena, 34, told herself it was coincidence, but her pulse betrayed her. He ordered coffee again, black as before, his voice soft but deliberate. She wanted to ask about the letter, about the address, but something in his eyes warned her not to. It wasn't fear, it was guilt. The kind that seeps through the skin and stays for years. She noticed the way his hands trembled when he lifted his cup, the scars running faintly across his knuckles. Every time he looked out the window, she wondered what memory he saw reflected there. The air between them carried unspoken weight, as if both knew this wasn't just a customer and waitress kind of night. For 3 nights he returned, always the same time, just after midnight. Sometimes he spoke a word or two, sometimes not at all. Yet each night he left behind something small. A folded dollar bill, a napkin, once even a sugar packet with her name scrawled on it. Elena didn't know what to make of it. Was he mocking her? Testing her? Or trying to say something he couldn't with words? On the 4th night, he lingered at the door before leaving. You remind me of forgiveness, he said quietly, almost to himself. The bell chimed as he stepped out, and for the first time she realized her hands were shaking. By the 5th night, her curiosity had grown into something sharp. When he entered, she didn't wait for his order. Why do you keep coming here? She asked. He hesitated, his gaze steady but sad. Because this is where it began, he said. The words hit her harder than she expected, though she didn't yet know why. He reached into his coat, pulled out another envelope, and placed it gently on the counter. For you, he whispered. Then, as if afraid to stay another second, he walked out into the storm, leaving her staring at the paper that could unravel everything she thought she'd bury. She waited until her shift ended to open the envelope. The paper inside smelled faintly of smoke and rain. The handwriting was the same, uneven, pained. I saw you before I knew who you were. The way you worked, the way you smiled through tired eyes. I didn't know the woman I'd wronged had been the one I was watching. The words made her blood run cold. Her mind raced back to the accident she never talked about. The one that took her husband's life. Suddenly, the man's quiet visits, the haunted look in his eyes, all began to connect like pieces of a puzzle she never wanted solved. That night, she walked home in silence, the wind cutting against her cheeks. Liam, 10, was already asleep, curled up with his sketchbook beside him. She stood over him for a long time, brushing a strand of hair from his forehead. Then she turned toward the kitchen counter, where the first napkin still rested beneath a magnet. 2 letters, 1 stranger, and a truth she wasn't ready to face. Yet she knew the moment she looked into that man's eyes again, she would see the reflection of everything she'd lost. And somewhere deep inside, she feared what would happen when he finally told her the truth. The morning after the stranger's fifth visit, the apartment felt unusually still. Elena, 34, tried to keep her movements quiet, not wanting to wake Liam, 10, but her mind was chaos. She kept replaying the letter's words, trying to fit them into her memory like shards of a broken mirror. When she finally left for work, she didn't notice the corner of another envelope peeking out from beneath the front door. Hours later, when Liam returned from school, he saw it first, his name written on it in shaky handwriting. He smiled, thinking it might be something from his teacher or a neighbor, but when he opened it, the first line froze him completely. "I knew your father." He sat on the living room floor, legs crossed, reading each word slowly, lips moving soundlessly. The letter spoke about a man who once worked at a repair shop near the harbor, a man with kind eyes and a laugh that filled the air. It said he was a good father and a better husband, and that the person writing the letter had taken something from him that could never be returned. Liam didn't understand it all, but the tone felt heavy, sad. He glanced at the framed photo of his parents on the table, wondering who could write something like this and why they'd send it to him. When Elena, 34, came home that evening, she found the letter on the couch. Her heart stopped the moment she saw Liam's name written across it. He was in his room, drawing quietly, pretending not to notice her trembling hands as she read. The words were almost identical to her own letter, but this one was simpler, written for a child's understanding. "I hurt your family once, but I never stopped wishing I could fix what I broke." She felt the room spin, her vision blurred, and she pressed the paper against her chest as if she could keep the truth from escaping. Later that night, Liam, 10, tiptoed into the kitchen where his mother sat staring at the napkin on the counter. "Mom," he whispered, "was Dad's accident really an accident?" The question hit her harder than anything the stranger had written. She wanted to lie, to protect him from the truth, but something in his eyes, so honest, so trusting, broke her silence. "Yes," she said softly, "but someone's sorry for it now." He frowned, confused, then asked, "Is it the man who keeps leaving you letters?" She didn't answer. She just reached out and held him, her tears falling onto his hair like confession. When she tucked him into bed that night, Liam, 10, looked up and said, "Maybe whoever hurt us is hurting too." The innocence in his words pierced through years of bitterness. She didn't realize she was still carrying. She kissed his forehead and whispered, "Go to sleep, baby." But long after he drifted off, she sat in the doorway watching him, the letter still in her hand. The night outside was quiet, windless, almost sacred. Somewhere out there, Michael, 42, was probably awake too, haunted by the same memories, waiting for forgiveness he wasn't sure he deserved. The next night, the diner was nearly empty when the bell above the door rang. Elena, 34, didn't need to look up to know it was him. Michael, 42, walked in slowly, shoulders heavy with something that looked like surrender. For a long moment, neither spoke. The hum of the neon light filled the silence between them. When she finally met his eyes, they were red-rimmed, as though he hadn't slept in years. "You read the letter," he said quietly. She nodded, her throat tightening. "Then you know." But she didn't, not fully. What she knew was that his voice carried the weight of something irreversible. "I think you should tell me everything," she whispered. And for the first time, he looked terrified. He began to speak slowly at first, as if dragging each word from the pit of his chest. "It was raining that night," Michael said. "I shouldn't have been driving. I thought I could make it home." He paused, trembling, his hands gripping the coffee cup as if it could hold him together. Elena, 34's breath hitched. "What night?" she asked, though her heart already knew. "The night your husband didn't come home." The words shattered the air like glass. The sound of rain against the window grew louder, almost cruel. She stepped back, shaking her head, her face pale and unreadable. "You were lying," she whispered. "No," he said softly. "I've been lying to myself for years." For a moment, time stopped. She couldn't breathe, couldn't move. Memories flooded back. The knock on her door that night, the officer's somber face, her son's cries. She had built her life around surviving that moment, never realizing the man responsible would someday sit across from her, asking for mercy. "Why now?" she demanded, voice trembling. Michael, 42, stared down at the table. "Because I saw what you became. I saw you keep going when I should been in the ground." His voice broke, raw and unguarded. "I needed to tell you before I die with this in me." She stared at him, searching for hatred, but all she found was hollow exhaustion, the kind that mirrored her own. The diner felt too small for what she carried inside. She turned away, tears burning her eyes. "You don't get to come back and fix this," she said. "You don't get to feel better." Michael, 42, nodded, eyes glistening. "I'm not here to feel better. I'm here to give you the truth I stole." She pressed her palms against the counter to keep from collapsing. Every part of her wanted to scream, to throw something to erase him, but another part, buried deep, saw the way he looked at her, broken, remorseful, stripped bare. "Go," she whispered finally. "Please." And for the first time, he obeyed. That night, Elena, 34, sat at the kitchen table long after midnight, the diner's smell of coffee still clinging to her clothes. Liam, 10, stirred in his sleep down the hall, unaware that the man who'd haunted their lives had just walked back into it, and out again. She unfolded the first letter, reading it under the soft kitchen light. The words no longer made her angry, they made her ache. For years, she had prayed for closure, not realizing it might come in the form of the very man she'd cursed. She didn't forgive him. Not yet. But for the first time, she didn't hate him either. And that small shift felt like the beginning of something she hadn't known in years. Peace. Morning came heavy and colorless. Elena, 34, stood by the window. That felt almost cruel. Liam, 10, shuffled into the kitchen, rubbing his eyes. "You didn't sleep again," he said quietly. She smiled weakly. "No." He climbed into a chair beside her, glancing at the folded letter on the table. "That's from the man, right?" She nodded. "Are you gonna write back?" The question struck her harder than any confession. For the first time, she realized forgiveness wasn't about him. It was about whether she could live with the weight she carried. At the diner that night, she worked like she always did, smiling at customers, refilling cups, wiping tables, but her thoughts kept circling back to Michael, 42. Every sound, every face reminded her of him. Around midnight, she caught herself staring at the booth where he used to sit. The seat was empty, but somehow it still felt occupied. She whispered to herself, "He took so much, and I still can't stop thinking about him." The cook in the back called her name, breaking her trance. She blinked, swallowing the ache. There was a fine line between hate and healing, and she wasn't sure which side she was standing on anymore. When she returned home, Liam, 10, was still awake, sitting cross-legged on the couch waiting. "Did he come tonight?" he asked. She shook her head. "No, I think he's gone." He thought for a moment, then said, "If he said sorry, does that mean he's good now?" She hesitated. "Sometimes people say sorry because they want to feel better, not because they are." He nodded slowly, processing it. "But sometimes they say sorry because they can't live without meaning it." His voice was soft, innocent, but it struck her deeper than anything. Maybe forgiveness wasn't about who deserved it. Maybe it was about who needed it most. That night, sleep didn't come easily. Every time Elena, 34, closed her eyes, she saw the accident. Her husband's face, the years of struggle that followed. And then, Michael, 42, kneeling at that booth, voice breaking. The anger she'd lived with for so long began to feel empty, useless. She rose quietly, walked to the kitchen, and took a clean sheet of paper. Her hand hovered above it for a long time before writing a single word. Why? Then another. How? Then finally, I forgive you. The words looked foreign, almost fragile, like something too delicate to exist in her world. But there they were, real. At sunrise, Elena, 34, walked to the diner before her shift started. The streets were still damp, the air heavy with mist. She placed the folded letter on the counter where Michael, 42, had always sat, her hand lingering on it for a moment. Then she whispered, "This is the last thing I owe you." As the morning light filtered through the windows, she felt something inside her loosen. Not relief, not joy, but release. For the first time in years, she wasn't carrying anyone else's guilt. When she turned the open sign around, her reflection in the glass looked different. Softer, lighter, whole. Whole. The next morning, Michael, 42, returned to the diner just after sunrise. The place was empty, quiet, washed in gold. He hesitated at the doorway as if unsure he had the right to step inside. On the counter, where he always sat, was a folded envelope. His name written in delicate, careful handwriting. His breath caught. He sat down slowly, afraid to touch it, as if it might vanish. For years he had carried guilt like armor, believing punishment was the only language he deserved. But when he opened the letter and saw her words, "I forgive you. For him. For me," his shoulders finally gave way. The tears came quietly, freely, washing over years of silence. He folded the letter carefully, as though it were sacred, and placed it back on the counter. Then, for the first time, he smiled, not out of happiness, but release. He stood, looked toward the kitchen where she usually worked, and whispered, "Thank you." The neon light flickered once before going still. He left a small photo of himself beside the letter, younger, standing near an old car. A silent offering of truth, not to erase the past, but to honor it. Then he turned toward the door, the morning air cool and forgiving. He didn't look back. Later that day, Elena, 34, entered the diner for her shift. The air felt different, lighter, as though something invisible had lifted. On the counter, she found his photo placed neatly beside her letter. She stared at it for a long time, her reflection shimmering in the window behind it. For the first time, she didn't feel anger when she saw his face, only understanding. She picked up the picture and whispered, "Goodbye." The sound was barely audible, but it carried all the weight she'd held for years. Then she smiled, a real gentle smile, and tucked the photo into her apron pocket like a reminder of what letting go feels like. That evening, she walked home early, something she hadn't done in years. The streets were quiet, the air filled with the scent of salt from the nearby sea. When she opened the door, Liam, 10, looked up from his drawings, surprised. "You're home before dark," he said, grinning. She nodded and smiled back, tears welling in her eyes. "I wanted to watch the sunset with you." They sat together on the small balcony, wrapped in a blanket, the sky bleeding into hues of orange and pink. She rested her head on his shoulder and whispered, "We're okay now." And for once, it was true. At dawn the next morning, sunlight streamed through the window, painting the apartment in gold. Elena, 34, stood by the kitchen counter where her napkin once sat, now replaced by a vase of wildflowers Liam, 10, had picked from the yard. She smiled softly, realizing life had found a way to be beautiful again. Not perfect, not whole, but healed in the quietest corners. The sound of her son's laughter echoed down the hallway, light and free. She looked out the window toward the distant road and whispered, "Thank you." It wasn't a prayer or a farewell, It was peace, the kind that stays.